Okay, you're on.
Okay. Well, today I like to talk about canker disease, those diseases that affect generally the wood of the almond tree. And yeah, believe it or not, David Hall and I take a lot of phone calls each year. And in terms of disease of pathology, those call for canker disease or being in the field and dealing with the dead trees is definitely one of the top phone calls we get. So, even experienced grower, experienced PCA, when you're in front of a dead tree, and that's what happened to me the first 5 minutes of the phone call, I scratch my head and say, what's going on out here? So what I like to discuss about that is there a diversity of issues that can cause a tree to die. And so it's very important for all of us to get an accurate diagnostic and really understand why this tree is dying. Because the problem, if you see a tree right now with a lot of gumming, what's gonna be your first assumption? A lot of the time we get, well, it's Phytophthora, so the PCA will eventually recommend Rhydomine or something to kill that Phytophthora, but most of the time it is not. So every time there is a lot of gumming at a tree, PCA or grower may assume we're dealing with Phytophthora. The reality is not just, there's many other things than just Phytophthora out there. So of course there's also, outside of disease, there are also plenty of issues such as abiotic. You have, it's what I told sometime on a phone call where you call me for a dead tree at the end of the road. Well, sometimes usually that could be just herbicide of too much water sitting here. So having an accurate diagnostic, it will be definitely enhance the success of your management strategy. So between 2015 and 2016, I actually, with the Almond Board of California, engaged a study to figure out what are all these fungal diseases that kill almond trees. So throughout the valley, we survey probably between Farm Call and Farm Advisor, we survey close to about 100 almond orchards and try to figure out all these things that are out there and that kill trees. So interestingly enough, one of the top disease that we found in almond is probably the oldest disease of almond, is Ceratocystis canker. So among all those trees that have some gumming somewhere, either near a pruning wound or near a shaker injury, Ceratocystis, this old disease, is still the #1 issue in the orchard. So how to recognize Ceratocystis? Of course, you know Ceratocystis is a canker disease that where trees got infected through shaker injuries. So when you get a shaker injury, so of course if your tree's gumming has never been checked, you're probably not dealing with Ceratocystis canker. But Ceratocystis canker will typically develop at a shaker injury. That shaker injury will be susceptible for about a 2 weeks period. And the way you separate Ceratocystis, let's say, from Phytophthora, that cannot be confusing. Generally, Phytophthora is not associated with the shaker injury, but both can be actually occurring from a large pruning cut on the tree. The way you separate Phytophthora from Ceratocystis is Ceratocystis produces a gumming that's only at the margin of the infection. So if you see that gumming only occurring at the margin, you're mostly dealing with Ceratocystis. If gumming is throughout the infection, then you're most likely dealing with Phytophthora. Again, Ceratocystis is something that you will find always associated with the mechanical harvest. And sometimes, surprisingly, David Hall and I are very complementary. We both have some experience in the field, but what I got is also a lab. So when in front of a tree and we try to figure really what's going on, my complementary job to David Hall is actually to take the field sample in the lab and confirm our diagnostic. And we realized, Botryopsferia canker disease, Ceratocystis canker, or Phytophthora is not always such a clear cut, but there are field tricks based on what I'm just described to recognize those various diseases. So Ceratocystis canker, the way this fungus is moved around, when the bark is injured, the fungus will produce those fruiting structures, and some beetles and Drosophila fly will move these spores from trees to trees and spread the pathogen this way. So ceratocystis, again, you know, it's an old disease. Like, it kind of got forgotten, but I actually reminded about it because we do see young trees that die about it. It's an also interesting disease in a sense that when you have a 25-year-old infected with ceratocystis, it seems like it survives. So you have all this gumming, you're kind of nervous, and you do panic about it. At this stage, there's really nothing to do. Your tree's gonna, you know, live and die with the disease. However, if a young tree about this size get infected, you could lose the entire scaffold and your entire tree. So there's no really any sort of treatment. However, in the old days, what they figured is when you got a shaker injury and when you have that canker developing at the margin, the fungus only goes for about half an inch in depth and not more than about an inch and a half in width, so it's only at the margin. So what I would say the old-timer used to do, they used to take this tool to kind of pretty much remove the infection on the edge of the canker, and that will heal naturally, and that will kind of take care of the infection. So if there's a tree you definitely want to save, there is this option to, I'm sure you call that tool, but one of those guys here, you can take one of these tools and try to remove the infection at the margin of the canker. So I mentioned Phytophthora. The way we do usually observe Phytophthora, we call it the perennial canker. Typically, a Phytophthora infection will occur and develop at the tree crotch. So that's where when you have, let's say, a poor scaffold selection, the scaffold comes to the same point right there, all the weight is on there, and that area will just crack, and that's where typically you see Phytophthora infection. You can also see some Phytophthora species infected large pruning wound, and again, you will see a gumming throughout the infection area. With Phytophthora, however, if you suspect that in your field, and that's again, when you're on a farm call, you always want to keep a very open mind and always look at the large picture. Your tree is dying, you suspect Phytophthora, the first thing is you want to ask you, am I on surface water? Of well water. If you're on well water, you're unlikely to deal with Phytophthora because Phytophthora spores are known to be actually moved around on surface irrigation water. So first question to ask yourself, am I on surface of a well water? Also, if you suspect Phytophthora, you may kind of observe this gumming, and Phytophthora will actually move like a couple feet over a growing season. So it's really fast during the growing season, really active compared to ceratocystis that tend to grow slowly. From there, well, for Phytophthora or a lot of these canker disease, they usually enhanced by a poor scaffold selection. I put in this picture these three major scaffolds coming together, where a little pocket of waters just stand there, and those are the ideal condition for Phytophthora. What we figure is Greg Brown at UC Davis, when the harvester come and cause all these dust to come up in the tree, Phytophthora is known to be a soil-borne disease, so we figure how does it get into the tree? Well, during harvest, all this air blast is being produced. Those spores are actually picked up from the ground, blown into the air, and as rain occurs, the spores are being washed off, and they will just remain into this little tree crotch pocket here where the water sits, and that's how the spores will germinate and get into the tree through a crack. So we also seen Phytophthora in some young plantings. Actually in situation where you not think Phytophthora may occur. Those were in Bakersfield or in Kern County, and very sandy spot, and we saw all this tree dying, and and guess what? We isolated Phytophthora. In that situation, we noticed the grower had done some co-planting, and the bud union was just below the soil line. So the scion was really susceptible to Phytophthora. The fungus was picked, and of course, all these trees died of it. So your first management against Phytophthora is to have a proper planting and not having your bud union below ground. I think we still have phosphite, I think we had some issue with the Europes, as phosphite have been now in Europe classified as fungicide, pesticide, so there's MRL now for phosphite, so you want to check with maybe your processor what that situation is right now. So phosphites are maybe on their way out for Phytophthora, but they have been good product, and I mean, you know, we always hear good thing. The other one is Ridomil. What I feel and what I hear, it's a very expensive product, so if you're going to use it, make sure you know exactly that you are dealing with Phytophthora. You know, we've seen some effect on those perennial canker, but however, the other day we were on a farm call where the PCA felt we may be dealing with Phytophthora, so they spray Ridomil. In fact, we were dealing with bacterial canker. So that's a lot loss of money for the growers. Another common disease of almond trees, the verticillium wilt. I think it's a kind of a classic, everybody know that one, but we do find some confusion, and I've also sometimes been in situation where we had pre-emergence herbicide injuries. So we've seen damage on the tree that just look like a wilt, and we got kind of a little bit confused of what we may be dealing with here. Is it verticillium? Is it some injuries? I've seen ceratocystis very rarely causing an infection in those shoots that are being pruned inside the trees, and kind of symptoms look very the same. It's kind of a portion of the side of the tree being wilted, so that very classic symptom of verticillium. Well, now if you deal with verticillium, the first question you may ask yourself is what was planted before in my field. Of course, if you had cotton, peppers or tomatoes, all these veg crops that are susceptible to verticillium, that's the perfect scenario for verticillium to occur. But believe it or not, I still meet with growers that have interplanted cotton in those young almond orchards for a couple years. And well, tree did not look good and did suffer some birds. So planting cotton at the early stage of your almond planting is one of the worst things you can do. So if you're anyhow suspicious or in fears that you may have been dealing with verticillium because you had cotton before in the field, first things you want to do is maybe work with one of these labs and get a count for sclerotia. So sclerotia is the surviving structure of verticillium, and those labs actually can take a soil sample and have a count or an estimate of this microsclerotia. And so we know with almond, if you have about 3 microsclerotia in your field, you're quite at risk for verticillium. However, verticillium, don't worry about it. Once your tree is over 5 years old, that's it. You're not going to have any issue at this stage with verticillium. It's another cool spring weather disease. So we had a cool spring, I believe, this year. So that's probably a good year for us to, in some of these young orchards, to expect some bird. So yeah, I mentioned management of vert is really kind of try to get an estimate in your orchard of what are the risks for vert, yeah, accordingly, avoid all these factors that may favor the disease. Another disease that actually been quite interesting this year. When you see all these trees with gumming and kind of a general collapse, here and there you may be dealing with bacterial canker. So bacterial canker, also the first things you want to ask yourself, because those are the two common names. When I meet growers and they see gumming on a tree, they think it's either Phytophthora or bacterial canker. Now, well, the first things you want to ask yourself about bacterial canker is, am I into a sandy area, right? Or did we have also some cold event or freezing temperature? But bacterial canker is usually limited to the sandy spots where you have high counts of ring nematodes. So the ring nematode will stress the trees, and also being in a sandy area where you get lots of leaching of your nitrogen, it's really harder for your tree to pick up all the nutrients. Those are perfect scenario for bacterial canker to occur. And bacterial canker is ubiquitous. If I make a scan of that bark there or something, if I try to play that, I'm going to find this bacterial, this Pseudomonas. It's pretty much ubiquitous. It's everywhere. So if I am on a sandy spot and I chose the wrong rootstock, I do see that again a lot. I'm on a sandy spot and the grower selected the Hansen rootstock. That's not good. You're gonna see some bacterial canker. So if you're gonna be at risk for bacterial canker, you want to get the most tolerant rootstock to the ring nematodes. So there will be Viking, I would think, on top, and maybe Lovell next. And it's quite easy actually to diagnose bacterial canker in the field, because if you peel the bark, again, it's a disease of young tree. After 5-6 years, you don't see so much bacterial spot. But if you remove the bark on the stem, you will see the canker will be kind of irregular, patchy, and you will see all this speckling, and this is very indicator of bacterial canker. It could be confused also sometimes with Phytophthora, some crown rot or something. However, bacterial canker, if you peel the bark, when you get to the soil line, the canker stops. So the canker doesn't go below the soil line or doesn't even come up. So if something comes up, you may suspect some Phytophthora. But the canker will typically stop just above the soil line. So that's kind of very great tool great tip for diagnostic. Yes, symptoms usually are found this time of the year, or even late winters, when your orchard is still foggy and cold. You can see the first expression of bacterial canker. People always talked about this very sour smell. Sorry, I don't really pick it up when I take some bark and I smell the bark. For me, it's always kind of smells some sort of sour. So I'm not sure how this is reliable, but the sour smell is some field diagnostic way too. But what we've been seeing this year, it's been really kind of interesting. So bacterial canker, as you know, sometimes it has multiple phases in that disease complex or cycle. What we've seen this year is the bacterial blast phase of the disease. So bacterial blast is when these young flowers and young leaves who actually just got grilled by the bacteria. So this is the blast phase. Sometimes it's just limited to the flower. What we've seen this year was the flower and the leaves. And when we picked the leaves, we had a sort of lesion on the margin, and you could see this actually thick yellow halo on the edge of the margin. And thus, we all question that, farm advisor, even everybody, because what we've seen this year, experienced farm advisor that have been working in for 30 years within the UC system, never had seen that bacterial blast and bud drop phase being so bad. So the other phase of bacterial canker we've seen this year was actually this tree that completely failed to push. They pushed a couple, it does got grilled as well instantaneously. So what we saw this year was this bacterial, what we call bud drop. Is not exactly a bud drop, but it's buds that fail to push. And again, you're in a sandy area. You saw all these trees pretty much didn't push at all. So the bacteria got within some freeze event during the winter, was able to make its way in the buds, and the buds got killed. They were necrotic and never pushed. So this year we had everything, and we can ask growers here that have been farming for a long time. It's not something that occurs very commonly. We had a very wet winter, freezing events, so that bacterial bud drop and blast was really present this year. We got it from Stanislaus, San Joaquin, Merced, Madeira. We got calls in Kern County. That thing was pretty much all over the place this year. Bacterial canker, again, one of your best friend out there is a good selection of rootstock when you're going to be in sandy spots. So Viking is what we put on top out there in terms of recommendation. And also we have recommended grower to kind of do some low biuret nitrogen application in the fall. With this, you will allow your tree to kind of make a good recharge of nitrogen reserve for the next vegetative cycle. So low biuret nitrogen application in the fall are a good way also to boost your tree to prevent further disease from the bacterial canker. I'm less experienced at date doll. I got my notes. So, again, yeah, well, if you had well, let me move to another disease of young tree. The other one is disease that usually growers tend to panic a lot when they see that. It's band canker. So band canker is called by a fungal pathogen, the Botrytis fariaceae. And the way you recognize band canker, again, in this young tree between 2 and 6 years old, you see actually along the trunk, you see band of gumming. Either 1 band, 2 bands, sometimes 3 bands. And that you separate it from ceratocystis or Phytophthora because the disease is not associated really with a pruning wound or shaker injury, but the disease occurs at cracks that are produced by those highly vigorous rootstock or those rootstock that get lots of nitrogen and water. They will grow very quickly. I always have this anecdote. I grew up in the south of France. A 25 years old almond tree is about that size, which is the size of a third leaf tree here. So this tree goes so fast that they produce those cracks, and those cracks are sites of infection for those fungal pathogen, the Botrytis fariaceae, and all that disease develop into a ring, like along the circumference of the tree. So you may see 1, 2, 3 bands. Eventually, if you're going to get 3 bands, the tree may die. But usually, I tell growers to not panic so much because that disease will kind of go away. The Botrytis fariaceae fungi seems somehow to be trapped and not move into the new wood. So you may have gumming for a couple of years, but most generally, your tree will just get over it. So for band canker, what I was going to say, for band canker, really kind of maybe watch your vigorous rootstock, manage your nitrogen. But again, I've got a picture here where you see the infection is kind of contained, and the tree will definitely survive this sort of issue. So the same Botrytis fariaceae fungi, and with that we have quite a few fungal pathogens that I can also infect through large pruning cuts. So I mean, in the almonds right now we are moving towards maintenance pruning, but when you create large pruning sites on your tree, you may get an infection by an array of fungal pathogens. The main one being the bud. So the same bud that can cause band canker will cause this other canker, very dark color, usually V-shaped canker. That's how you recognize it. And usually you see those big orange gumballs around near the pruning wood, and that's Botrytis fariaceae canker in the canopy. We have Eutypa. Eutypa is a very well-known pathogen of apricots, stone fruit in general. It's prevalent in the grape. Also, Eutypa dieback or Eutypa canker can cause a tree to die back, as well as the other one we've been picked up important into the prune are Cytospora species. So Cytospora species are things we are also finding to cause gumming and canker, and they will typically cause an entire branch or scaffold to die. Those can also infect through the cracks at the tree crotch. I've got some illustration here, but sometimes you get those really terrible cracks right there, and those are source of infection for the pathogen, and those are caused by poor scaffold selection. So all these fungal pathogen, I kind of just draw a general disease cycle, but Eutypa, Cytospora, Botrytis fariaceae, they could grow pretty much on all sorts of different hosts, like riparian trees, cottonwoods, native plant species, ornamental. Most likely this eucalyptus will have some bud or something. So that's usually where they come from. They may be also in the orchard into some old stump. But the disease cycle pretty much is a no-brainer. You got rain, you got a fresh pruning cut, you're gonna get a sort of infection, right? So what I always try to discuss with growers is how can we go around that? Is there any logic for growers to prune maybe in the early fall when there's less rain? Because if we're going to prune in the winter, the logistic of farming almond is to prune usually in November, December, maybe January still. At this time of the year, you're going to get rain, and your pruning wound is going to be susceptible most likely for like 50 days. So that's why when we prune during winter time and make large cut, especially large cut, you're going to get a chance to get those infections. And we've seen young almond tree getting hit really hard actually with some of these Botrytis fungi also coming through pruning wounds. So I'm not sure if really there's any way to kind of try to move towards post-harvest type of training, but usually in the logistic of almond, I understand it's much easier to do that work in the winter. That's where your tree are going to be at risk. We also launched a major study with the Almond Board of California. We took all the fungicide register for all disease in almond, and we're testing all of these fungicides for pruning wound protection. In the meantime, we recommend a pruning wound sealer or just an acrylic paint on this big wound to just create a barrier and to avoid the infection. One thing I forgot to mention, with all these band canker disease, one of the most favoring factor will be your sprinkler irrigation that come and just wet the trunk. When you see that, you may get issues. Band canker has been extremely bad in the last couple of years. We've seen, 20-30% of the trees are infected in some orchard in the area here. And we always noticed that the sprinkler was just wetting the trunk all the time. So you want a favor drip, or you want to put a little stop from your water to not wet the trees. So general recommendation for the management of this canker disease that infect through pruning wound is, of course, appropriate scaffold selection. If you get inside your almond production manual, there are this recommendation that you need to respect a spacing, vertical spacing of your scaffold, so they don't come all at the same point on the tree, but you want to respect the vertical spacing. You want a good anchorage of your scaffold branch into the trunk with generally a 45-degree angle, and similarly you want to distribute your 3 scaffold into a 360 plants. So respect your vertical spacing and horizontal spacing. Again, there's no miracle fungicide at this time, but we're working to eventually know if any could work. We have done some work in cherry and grapevine where Raleigh together with Tapsin seems to work for pruning wood protection, so we want to apply this concept and test those into the almond. Again, if you're gonna want to minimize your effort, at least spray those large pruning cuts if you make any. So I think this is what I got for canker disease. Now I'm going to call David Dole out there. And we're going to move to the foliar disease, I think. David Dole? Any question on canker diseases?